Okay, this week I've been on the receiving end of a couple interviews, and I wanted to do this is my first interview with someone, and this is Roland and Boef, who is a native of the Netherlands, and after when I started doing videos, I started getting a lot of emails and Facebook messages from a lot of different individuals, and Roland was one, and Roland and I have actually had a really fruitful conversation back and forth. And so I asked him if he'd be willing to go on YouTube and do an interview with me because I wanted to get some Dutch perspective on a lot of the Peterson stuff coming out of the Netherlands. So Roland, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
All right, I am Roland. I'm 23 years old. I'm currently studying philosophy at the Free University in Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands. And well, yeah, how did I get to you? How did I get to Peterson? Well, it basically started with Donald Trump, and that was kind of funny because, well, here in the Netherlands, everyone thought, well, Donald Trump, that's just a joke. And we laughed about it and it was fun. But then he suddenly started winning and winning, and he wasn't tired of winning yet. And so I thought, well, what's going on there? And due to some unfortunate circumstances, I had too much time to kill. And so I decided to jump into it. And it was fascinating. So I basically discovered a lot of stuff that was going on in America in the political sphere, I would say, and also on YouTube. And there's so much stuff on YouTube that most people don't know about, I think, in the real world, lectures and talks and interviews, and there's just a lot of interesting stuff going around. And so I think Peterson kind of blew up when he what was it, the Bill C-16 stuff. So he refused to use certain pronouns, and so I came across him and I thought that was interesting. And he it was really useful as well because, well, I was having a hard time, honestly. I wasn't doing so well, and I had my problems, and he basically helped me sort out some of them. And so, well, yeah, I'm a young guy. I stereotypical Peterson listener, I suppose, but not in other ways. Um, I'm also a Reformed Christian, so that's also a reason that Paul and me actually started talking. And so that's basically how I found out about him, and I just stuck around because I thought a lot of his psychology stuff was very interesting and helpful, and I've been very interested in that before already, because, well, personal issues, not personal issues, but things going on around me, I would say.
Okay, so what about Peterson's message do you think really gripped you and intrigued you enough to sit through hours long lectures of his?
Yeah, I mean, initially, I mean, he has done those biblical lectures, which were very interesting. I mean, I just had to watch them. You're a Reformed Christian, and this guy, this psychology professor, is lecturing about the Bible, and I just didn't understand what was going on. But before that, it was just really like um, his message of realism and the personal responsibility stuff. I think that he affirmed that you have choices and that you have the ability, you have potential. That would be his favorite word, I guess, and that you weren't living up to that, and that you could do much better than you did. And that was very helpful because I basically was in a difficult situation, and I just didn't know whether things would really become better. And he basically, well, he helped me to reaffirm that things really could go better, that I could make a difference in my own life, and that I could progress more. I could feel better. I could. Um, get more healthy, hopefully. And yeah, that just really helped me, and I got way more productive because of that, and also with my studies, and that was just very helpful, and I'm still grateful for that.
That's very. Did you do the future authoring program or anything like that?
I did the entire thing
R-
basically, uh,
really?
which was it was helpful, I think. Yeah, but I mean, I also watched quite a lot of his material, so I'm not. It's difficult to say what basically helped me, whether it was the authoring or just watching lectures and such of him. But yeah, I mean, it did really help, even though it was a little bit depressing here and there. And yeah,
You're a Calvinist. Life is depressing, isn't it? I mean, isn't this part of Calvinism?
yeah, and that's also really what I not like. Like is a bit of a strange word, but yeah, I mean he's just realistic. He's not gonna pull his punches. I mean, life is really involves a lot of suffering and a lot of evil, and you're not innocent either. And I thought, yeah, that's right, and I'm not all that. I really, I still sometimes thought, well, I'm not all that bad. I mean, how could I be a Nazi? It just seems far fetched often because you're just not, you're in such a peaceful and a positive environment that you just can't really imagine that you would just run off a cliff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that he helped me also better understand the psychology of evil and how evil works and how you become evil. Because what in church I've heard nothing but that. Now that's a little bit a little bit rude maybe, but yeah, I mean that was part and parcel of the message. And I but they weren't psychologists, and
Yeah.
well, he really helped me understand how that was possible, that such a thing is true,
Yeah.
how it actually works.
Yeah. Roland and I are talking about doing another interview talking church because one of the things that I'm interested in is how church and culture interact. And so the Christian Reformed Church, of which I'm a minister of, left the Netherlands, and so you have this same church from two different roots, and or from one root in two different contexts, going through time separately. And so I thought, but that's another conversation. We decided to talk mostly about Peterson in this conversation. Now you're a graduate student studying philosophy. Are you aware of any other graduate students talking about Peterson? Have you heard much chatter at the Free University about him?
Not really, actually. I think that, and in my social circles, actually, people aren't that into the social media and YouTube and things like that. It's quite a traditional environment. And on university, well, I'm sure there must be some students that have seen him, and but I don't know any of them actually. But um, I think that's just because this entire thing is just running online on YouTube and other social media, and that just makes it can really be disconnected from um, real life institutions.
Okay. Now Peterson, at least from this perspective, I mean, he was in Europe for his book tour, and he gave some speeches in the Netherlands. He did some interviews. What's your sense of, even here in the U.S., and Canada, there was a fair amount of press about Peterson, and in fact, he had articles. David Brooks had an article about him. Peggy Noonan had an article about him. These are some pretty top shelf journalists in the American print world. What kind of exposure did he get in the Netherlands?
Well, actually, I mean, he gave the keynote speech in a big event on integration, and so that basically meant that the leading newspapers over here had to write something about him, and so I've read some interviews in the what I call the quality newspapers, which are usually a little bit progressive, and so. But he was also interviewed on blogs and online sources and news sources, and basically it was really interesting to see how, for example, one of the progressive papers really kind of boxed him in with the alt-right and really went into, just pushed him in as a sort of anti-PC, almost lunatic, just someone raging about all this transgender and just gender stuff. And in the other progressive newspaper, which might be more politically correct in some ways, they actually had a really nice interview with him, also about his book and his rules for life, and that was very good actually and very fair. And so it was mixed. So one of them was just very political, and the other was just really fair, I think. And the biggest newspaper of the country, which is right wing, I would say, it is not as high regarded because they don't really pretend to be very objective, but they had really an article about him as the enemy of political correctness. So they also took the political view, but then on the other side, but it was basically the online world that really got in touch with Peterson's message, I think, because they have the time to sit down with him and just write articles and conduct long interviews, and mainstream media organizations just don't do that usually.
Okay. Now, I know it's hard for you to know how things look on this side, so my question is more how things look on that side. So there's obviously in the United States and Canada, and it seems like in the UK, a pretty fierce debate in terms of these pronouns, political correctness. What is that like in the Netherlands? Are you having a similar major public debate, or is this just something going on more in the English-speaking world?
Well, it's very interesting because in the Netherlands, we got this right-wing populist thing that started in 2000, around that time. So it's like 18 years ago, and you got a politician called Pim Fortuyn that basically blew up the progressive consensus on mainly on issues of immigration, multiculturalism, Islam, and technocracy. And he was very anti-politically correct, and he was also demonized by the progressive media and the establishment, you could say. And basically he was shot just less than 2 weeks before the elections, and by a left-wing activist. And so that was more than 15 years ago already. And since then, I think we are one of the least politically correct countries in the Western world, actually. And that's also thanks to that, I think. And in 2005, that's 3 years after his murder, there was a film maker that got shot by a radical Muslim. So the political violence, all the terrorism, actually was, you had two of those instances very early on, and that just the whole thing shifted a lot to the right. And actually our prime minister he says things now that would be deemed beyond the pale 20 years ago.
Really?
And yeah, I think so. And then that means that you just got all this change that's going on in online and in America. I think we got that way earlier, and it's still going on. I mean, it's not like the problems with multicultural society, it's not the integration, immigration, Islam, European Union is also a part of it now. Those problems are still around. I think in the Netherlands they are we have the least amount of issues compared to surrounding countries like Belgium, France, Germany, the UK. They all got way worse problems with radicalism and political correctness. I mean, you get crazy stories sometimes from the UK and Germany as well about complete lack of free speech if you're on the right, and that's totally not the case here. Actually, I would think. And then you got the Geert Wilders guy that's kind of famous across the borders, but yeah, he's very radical, and he's kind of going downhill right now. He's had his time. He's more than 10 years old. He's not going to get anything done. But yeah, he wants to ban the Quran. He wants to close mosques and those things. So yeah, I mean, that has been part of the national conversation for more than 15 years. And what you see is that the culture war issues from America and those are different because you really got the gender stuff, the what Peterson would call the neo-Marxists, like I mean feminism, intersectional feminism, those kinds of issues. They are just not very important here. We really focus on the old political correctness / incorrectness, and not so much on the new hot topics. Although just this the past year, it just starts to seep into the national debate. In the progressive newspapers, I would say they're starting to use terms like white privilege and the like. So, but that's not common knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. So it's really the new culture war issues are not very important here.
Okay. It's really interesting because for, especially myself growing up in the Christian Reformed Church, the reputation of the Netherlands was always liberal. Now, some of that is church business, but some of that is, we often have Americans live in, much less so Canadians, but Americans live in this huge bubble where we imagine ourselves to be the center of the universe. So we have all this gravity, so we can't see beyond ourselves. So all our images of other countries are very low resolution. And so when people hear Netherlands, they think windmills, dikes, red light district in Amsterdam, and drug legalization. That's what they know. But so your picture is fleshing out the the reality of the Netherlands quite a bit better, and I think helps kind of give a little bit of sense of why Peterson spent so much time there.
Yeah, because well, I mean, there's the other side of the Netherlands. I think we just got very progressive in a sense in the 2000s, just before that, and gay marriage was first legalized in the Netherlands, and you got drugs that's actually not strictly legal, which is very interesting. It's just allowed, but it's not legal. Very interesting stuff. But in a sense, we are very progressive. For example, like what do you call it in English? Physician-assisted suicide. Yeah. I mean, that's really the big thing here now. So in a way, we are very progressive on more the medical ethical issues, but the more the cultural issues, that's really shifted to the right a lot.
That's very interesting. Now one of the big interviews Peterson did. Now you're going to have to say some of these names. Hen style. I can't speak Dutch. So what is that blog? Tell me a little bit about that blog.
Yeah, it's just it is a blog from like 2005 2007 I think, and it's basically the most anti-PC blog you can imagine, and they will really go to any length to prove how anti-PC they are. And their motto is unfounded, tendentious, and needlessly hurtful. And that's what they're proud of, actually. They're really
Say
proud of that.
that again a little bit more slowly.
Unfounded, tendentious, and needlessly hurtful.
Unfounded, tendentious, and needlessly hurtful. That's their motto as a blog.
Yes.
So I don't know the internet world even on this side of the pond that well to think about a parallel here, but I'm sure someone in the comment section will point one out. So they're really in your face in terms of the stuff they do. And you told me about a stunt that they did too recently.
Yeah, they really love provocations, ridicule, mocking people, attacking the government, just making fun of everything holy. And they're ruthless, crude, and vulgar. They love sexist and racist jokes. They love sexual language and all that thing. So it's really, for a Christian, you really don't want to be seen there. It's just pretty disgusting. And the thing I told you about was that there was a kind of a sexist practice in their on their video website that they used bikini models to rate videos, and a female journalist complained about that and said, well, if you're an advertiser, maybe you don't want to advertise on such a site. And then they shot back, and they basically asked their audience to send rape fantasies to that female journalist, and that really blew up. And it was absolutely disgusting. It was really, I didn't want to read any of it. So bad it was, and they actually did lose some advertisers. But yeah, I mean, that's what we were talking about here. They're also very anti-religious, and just they're not racist, I would say, strictly speaking, but it's just, that's really the kind of blog you're talking about.
And I'm just gonna pull up the video here so that people watching us, not that one, but that was this interview. Um, so and that was a major interview that Peterson did with them, and that was and I thought that was one of the most the young man who was interviewing Peterson. I mean, he was a fan.
Yes, a fanboy. He called himself a fanboy, and the people behind Geen Stijl, they called themselves like teenagers in love that just didn't know how to get a boy, and just in love with Justin Bieber or something like that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
They just admire Peterson. I really think so, and it's very interesting, and I think it really has a lot to do with this anti-PC stuff, but also Geen Stijl has a really young male audience, which is the same audience as Peterson has on YouTube generally. Okay. And I think a lot of his life advice really resonated with them because they were staunch atheists. But I mean, atheism doesn't really tell you what to do and what to strive for and what's valuable and what's dangerous and what's evil and what's good. And so I think there was kind of an existential hole somewhere in their view of the world, and Peterson came around, and that really resonated with them. And I mean, the interview was the most polite and pleasant interview I've seen, and that was just amazing.
That really, I mean, when I'd seen the interview and I thought it was a great interview. Peterson was, I think, enormously transparent, as he usually is, with his audience. The interviewer had his own reading of Peterson that he wanted to give to Peterson and have Peterson check it out. That's so interesting to me that this group, which has been so in your face reactive, seems to have such a hunger, like you said, a fanboy. That's what he said. I'm a fanboy, and it was I mean, it was falling all over Peterson. And what do you think of that? Do you think there's? I mean, you already said something in terms of atheism. You have any additional comments or another read on that? I mean, do you think Peterson had any idea who he's talking to? I mean, he has shown a willingness to talk to just about anybody, which is frankly something I respect. But
It's dangerous.
yeah, it's you could understand, at least in terms of the Dutch, if this is the platform he's going on. I would imagine a lot of people would take a step back and say, should we listen to this guy?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if I hadn't known him, I would really be like, what is this about? It doesn't look all that nice and great. And yeah, I mean, I think he really just changed him, and he changed them. And um, well, I think they had a kind of a partnership, even that the commenters on Geen Stijl could send him questions and he would answer those after his speech on the event. So I really don't think Peterson knew all that much about Geen Stijl, and I'm sure he doesn't read Dutch. So
Yeah.
he just got into it, and I mean, I can understand that people think, well, if that's the people he's talking to, then I don't want to have anything to do with him. But I do think he has a profound positive influence on these people and on their readers. And that these, I mean, if you get, these were very, very anti-Christian people, and they really could be vicious and aggressive. And now they talk about Genesis and the Logos and how you should aim for the highest good, apparently unaware of the fact that that's a definition of God. And it was just, and things like the foundation of our civilization is the inherent worth and sacredness of the individual, which came from the Christian doctrine that says that God lives in each individual. And that was on their website. So they're basically crediting Christianity for a civilization. And I thought, that's just amazing. That's just amazing.
Well, to me too, this has been a big part of why once I began to start to figure out what was going on with Peterson, why I was so drawn to it, because I and I saw, and especially once I started putting up videos, I started getting comments and emails and Facebook messages from from people who are atheists, and they're saying, I've given up on Christianity, or I always was antagonistic towards Christianity, but now I want to find out more about it. And so, I think in some ways, as a pastor, part of the difficulty of growing up Christian and living very deeply within the Christian pond is that when you read passages like the Pharisees taking offense at Jesus, eating with sinners, that loses its edge. But, say, in a sense, Peterson doing an interview with a blog that asked its readers to send rape fantasies to female journalists. I mean, that's about as grimy as you can get, in at a certain layer. That's about as bad as it comes.
Yeah.
And then to see the impact he's had on these people, and also in that interview there was a when they first started talking about the Kathy Newman interview, and you shedding a light on who they are makes that initial front end of that interview with a deep dive into the Kathy Newman interview. That really explains why they went there. But it's also in that interview that Peterson very transparently says, it kind of exposes, in his Jungian language, the shadow side. As a Christian, we would probably talk about our human nature as, wanting in that moment, thinking, in the aftermath of the Kathy Newman interview, oh, do you think there aren't plenty of internet trolls and bad characters who I couldn't unleash on Kathy Newman because of how this thing fell out? When that was exactly what this blog did to these female journalists. That's an incredible set of circumstances.
That's really attentive. That's a good observation. And I mean, I think maybe if they notice it, I mean, I hope they learn a lot from him and they become more like him in a lot of ways. And I think that's definitely progress. And I still think that most of them, especially, well, a lot of people just they don't see the more orthodox view of Christianity. That they just don't see that as a viable alternative to other world views. So they do think of they do appreciate the existential message that you can derive from it, and what Peterson tries to do. And but the more the Christian metaphysics, that's just a really big stumbling block, I think, for them.
It's interesting that in the wake of Peterson, there's an active debate, and I think we're going to, if Peterson continues to grow in visibility, I think we will see, at least on this side in the U.S. and Canada, a more active debate within the church about how the church should respond to what's been happening with him. I don't know if you have any. I mean, you're not a pastor, but you are a Christian and you do go to church. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, especially in the light of what we just talked about in terms of, I want to say, learn how to say this name, Hain style. Is that it?
That's pretty good, pretty good. Yeah.
Say it for me.
Geen style.
Hain style.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have no style. That's the name. They don't have style.
Oh, they have no style. That's what the name means.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. So
Yeah.
so I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on, because this is what drove me to start making videos, because I when I started meeting with what we're kind of calling buckos, who are Jordan Peterson fans,
Yeah.
some of them asked me quite frankly, is there space in the church for us, or would we be welcomed by the church? And honestly, I had to say, I would love to say yes, but I don't know that I can. And obviously they'd be welcome in my individual church because I'm the pastor,
Yeah.
and I think people listening to my videos are getting an understanding of where I stand with respect to all of this. But the question of, could let's say in the Netherlands, a devotee of Geen style come into a church and say, I've got all these ideas about political incorrectness, and I've got some anger, and I've even got some stuff about Christianity, but because I've been listening to Jordan Peterson, I want to dip my toe in. What's your read on that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult because, I mean, my own church, our churches are just pretty conservative. I don't think that the culture they could really appreciate it, and I can also see its drawbacks. But um, I mean, who am I to say to criticize everyone? But yeah, there is a I'm just thinking like where would it go? Because you also got more of the liberal churches, but I think they're just like lying pastors, and they don't really believe what they're saying, I think, often. And that's what Peterson is trying, and maybe they feel at home there, but I doubt it. And the problem with the evangelical community, for example, is that they are pretty anti-intellectual. They aren't usually. I mean, you're making broad
Sure,
generalizations,
sure. No, I
but,
get that.
yeah, you do also want the intellectual um, foundation and the space to talk about these things, and at the same time an open and welcoming church culture. And I think that's where our churches are failing people. So I think it's difficult to find a home, be as a bucko, I would say. And I mean, at some point there is the thing about, well, who is God? Does he really exist? And the questions that Peterson doesn't really answer. And what the value I see in it is that if this French guy Pascal, Blaise Pascal, he was a French 18th century or 16th, 17th, 18th century philosopher, scientist. He invented the calculator. Actually, he had some amazing contributions to mathematics and physics. But he was also a deep Christian believer and thinker. And he said, like, there's two parts of it. You can God's hidden, so you need to want to find him before you can find him. And if you want to resist him, you will not find him. And that's derived from the Bible, obviously. But so I think what Peterson's doing is that he makes it more like people want Christianity to be true instead of, I mean, the average Dawkins type atheist hates Christianity. He hates God as a judgmental father figure, dik zit geen stijl, and he hates talking about sin and guilt, and those things are real, but he doesn't want to be responsible to God. And I think if you come from the side of Peterson, you're like, well, maybe it's good. It would be good if it were true. Maybe I would like it to be true. And once you're at that point, you're gonna have to talk about metaphysics. You have to going to talk about apologetics, about reasons for believing. And I mean, I'm a philosopher. I thought about that a lot, and philosophy is difficult, and theology is difficult as well. But I do think these people need not just the kind of the approach of the heart, so you want to be true, but also, well, maybe there's really something into it. Maybe it really is actually factually true, and I see. I mean, that's difficult. That's a very difficult conversation. I don't think many churches are very well equipped for that. And I mean, you read Alvin Plantinga and the other guys, and I think those are really helpful. But I don't think many churches are really into that, and it's a shame. I really think that would both help believers to strengthen their faith. Well, I mean, that you don't just believe it because you believe it, or because you were told to believe it, or because you want to believe it, but you also believe because you know it, because there are some reasons why you believe, and it's not like an irrational leap of faith. And if you prepare yourself for such a conversation, and I think that's very helpful for everyone, actually.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's true, and it's, there are some. I think in some ways the internet is filling a gap in the on this side of the Atlantic. There's an organization called the Veritas Forum that puts on YouTube really credible conversations usually between Christian scholars and scientists and non-Christian scholars and scientists. And the conversations are respectful, they're illuminating, they're real conversations. Like, I think in a sense, when Peterson says, he'd like to have a conversation with Kathy Newman, not, the kind of thing that they did. And I see Veritas Forum holding these kinds of conversations where, you walk out of a theater or a classroom or something, and you could say, I learned something with this. And, I may still be a Christian or might still be an atheist, but I'm better informed and I know the other side better, and I can have this conversation better.
Yeah, that's certainly helpful. I mean, you really do need to have those conversations, and otherwise, I mean, yeah, it's because, as you say, it's just very difficult to. I mean, an Orthodox church has certain commitments that you just I mean, if you don't share those commitments, you don't really you can't really share in being a church, being a community of a church. And that sounds harsh, I think, and but in some sense it's just the way it is. I mean, if I'm a Christian, I'm not going to join an atheist organization. It's just, we just fundamentally disagree about it, and it's not going to work. And if you really have to commit to something and commit to a Christian life, that really needs to mean something. And if it's just jump by and then just do some stuff and come around a few times and go to church sometimes, and that's just not the same thing. That's not really what a Christian commitment means.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in the U.S., it'd be interesting to know. I think whenever you and I talk, we're going to wander into church space. I think it's just what's going to happen with our conversations. But part of what happened in the United States in evangelicalism was, and now a lot of some people in the Christian Reformed Church want to think of the Christian Reformed Church as evangelical because it's conservative and orthodox in a number of traditional things. I don't think of the Christian Reformed Church as evangelical because my definition of evangelical is not so much confessional but more missiological. And so one of the things that in the evangelical space in North America is that churches in America had a lot of freedom for experimentation. And so, for example, the seeker movement, which was headed by churches like Willow Creek and Bill Hybels, that, for a while they were distinguishing what they called their seeker services from their worship services. They'd have seeker services on Sundays and worship services on Wednesdays because they wanted their seeker services to be places where, people who didn't believe could participate and get a taste. And even though kind of the seeker movement has waned through, especially the coasts in the United States, that missional edge of creating churches where people who are skeptics or doubters can come in and explore, that has remained in at least to a certain degree of especially church plants and churches that I know. As a pastor, I never found this to be unusual because after my mission work in the Dominican Republic, when I came to the United States and I start getting to know people in church, one of the things you begin to realize is that, and I don't know if this is a dirty little secret, but people in churches have lots of different beliefs. They just don't fess up to them on Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's way worse here than it is in America, maybe, because we got this branch of Reformed churches, and they're still divided up in more churches, and it's actually kind of embarrassing. And I mean, basically everyone agrees it shouldn't be like this, but it's just really difficult to, if you believe strongly in certain important important things that in doctrine or in just the way church is supposed to work, it's just going to be difficult to share the same church and disagree so fundamentally, especially because people, yeah, well, there really is in I think the Reformed Church is one of the most intellectual churches in the sense that it's very focused on doctrine and on truth and those kinds of things, and less so on worship or like the Holy Spirit or or just liturgical symbols and things like that, like Roman Catholicism or Orthodox churches. And that really, if the differentiation between you is intellectual, then yeah, you're going to end up in different places.
Yep, yep, yep. No, I think that's really true. We're nearing the runway here. Anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
Well, out of the top of my head, um, maybe about um, Peterson's Bible interpretation. That would be interesting because it was a really. I mean, I'm a pretty critical person, and if I listen to a sermon and um, the pastor says things that just aren't in the Bible or aren't right there in the text that he's talking about, and I go, well, oh no, that's not in there. How did you get to that? So I need to be careful with that. You don't want to be overly critical, and but then I listen to Jordan Peterson, and I think, well, partly I have the same feeling, but also I really often I do have the feeling, well, he's really getting at something true, and I'm like, well, this is very symbolic and mythological interpretation, and that's usually considered very um, unreliable and just reading things into the text, and somehow he makes it sound compelling, and that's just very interesting.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a big focus of a lot of the work I'm doing. And I, so I was trained in what's called the grammatical historical method of interpretation, which in many ways is um, a reformational and increasingly post Enlightenment posture with respect to the text. And so that's where I began. But yet, when I was in seminary in the '80s, there was also a new wave coming in that was very much looking at the Bible as literature. And this was spearheaded. I did talked about this in a video by a Jewish scholar in Berkeley, actually named Robert Alter, and he'd written a number of interesting books like The Art of Biblical Narrative. And whereas the historical grammatical school of interpretation had kind of gone off into areas like form criticism and source criticism, which homiletically were very unproductive. The literature, looking at the Bible through a literary lens, actually was extremely helpful homiletically in terms of crafting sermons. And then for me also, just when I was in the Dominican Republic, I didn't have to do a lot of the kind of sermons I preached there were very different from here. But coming back to the United States and then producing at least two preps every week for something gave me a sense, that you do a deep dive into the Bible, then you begin to see the patterns and the stories. And this is where I think Jonathan Pageau's work is really helpful, because I think if our assumption is that we want to take seriously the intent of the author and the understanding of the original audience, we can't dismiss the symbolic level of this. And then all of a lot of the stuff that we know about the ancient Near East has only been unearthed in the last 150 years in archaeology in the Near East. And so, now we know about Gilgamesh and all of these, and then we see the similarities. Well, okay, so now the work of, say, John Walton, now you have the questions of, okay, how does the Bible fit into this broader world now that we know the broader world more? And how then should that impact our interpretation? And for Reformed Christians who are, via the Reformation, a highly confessional tradition, how then do we integrate this new knowledge in with our history of confessionality, a lot of which happened before, before the discovery of these other things. So in terms of, biblical studies, it's very interesting, and it's also very complicated on lots of levels, not the least of which is, say, in the American church, the American Christian Reformed Church is increasingly highly impacted by the broader evangelical community, including these other immigrant traditions like the Presbyterians, who in a sense are our cousins, but also Anabaptists, and then American denominations. So, and so then listening to Peterson, he jumps in there, and immediately I see a missiological angle to him, but then also this other work sheds light on a lot of this other stuff going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I never really had much of a connection with mythology, and it's just very interesting how I think it is a part of the appeal of Peterson, and the fact that guy from Geen Stijl, that he was talking in archetypes, and that was just amazing. And what I think also helps his way of reading the Bible is his psychology. I mean, he is a very wise man, I think, and he really knows how people work and how they interact, and he has so much psychological knowledge and wisdom that he just reads a story, and he really understands what's going on there, and I think that is what helps make his symbolic interpretation more reliable, and actually, because you say, well, that's really fair. I mean, it's so unreliable. There are so many ways you can go with this, and then you can go horribly wrong because you just keep putting things in the text that aren't there. But really, the psychological significance, as he calls it, I think that really persuades people of the value of these stories.
It's interesting to me, this other interview that we didn't talk much about. Boss, or what was the name of that one?
Eindbazen.
Eindbazen. That's this interview, which came out a little bit later. And again, another Dutch outfit. I thought that was also an interesting interview, and actually thought of you when I watched it, because towards the end of the interview, the commentator basically starts, it's so interesting to me, basically starts talking about, well, it's the divine part in us that connects us. And I thought, oh my goodness, we're back with the Greeks in this. We're connecting up with some Neoplatonism, and then we're going to be knocking on Augustine's door soon. And so it's very interesting how through this door Peterson is bringing up all kinds of connections, even with the traditional history of philosophy. And a lot of these old ideas now through Peterson are coming up again.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Plato's full of those themes. I mean, Plato knew Homer and the tragedies, and it's just, it really was more connected than it is right now, especially analytic philosophy. It is so dry, it is so argumentative, it is so scholarly, and it doesn't connect to real life.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. I just want to thank you, Roland, for doing this for me, and hopefully we'll do another video. That I don't know how much the Jordan Peterson fans will be interested. Maybe some. I'm hoping the other video might have an audience with some Christian Reformed people, because I am fascinated by church and culture and history. And one of the interesting things is that, again, the Christian Reformed Church is kind of over on the conservative spectrum, but it made decisions in the 50s to, in my language, take the walls down. And you sounds like you're part of a church that kind of kept the walls up, but the Netherlands is different. And so all those are such interesting issues to me. So, but thank you, Roland.
Thanks for the invitation, and it was a pleasant time talking to you, and I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.